This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London. All of our podcasts are available from our website, www.sas.ac.uk.
It's a pleasure to be here with all these literature people, because I don't normally hang out with literature people, so it's really nice, especially as I love literature. And to finish on that, Frankenstein was brilliant, because I do actually, it's one of the novels that I do really like to draw upon in many ways when we're thinking about disability, difficult differences, and how we might end up thinking about humanity. I guess some of you are non-sociologists, the easiest way for me to probably to let you understand how I understand the social world, or how I understand how I want you to know what I'm thinking about in many ways, is probably to just to sort of draw upon and quote C. Wright Mills, who was writing in the late 1950s, and he wrote The Sociological Imagination. And he basically was talking, I mean, I'm being very crude now in my analysis, but he basically talked about private troubles and public issues. And so, you know, so when he was telling us about public issues, he was talking about unemployment, divorce, you know, family patterns, crime statistics, all of those sorts of things that do have an impact on public life, so to speak. And then the private troubles are those things that we need to think about in more depth, but they're actually the things that are affected by unemployment, divorce, crime, but also are experienced for people who are, you know, going through poverty or going through breakdowns of relationships, either being criminally active or having a crime committed against you. So, if you like, from a qualitative sociological perspective, I'm looking at the private lives, really, of individuals, mothers, and of some fathers. So parents, but more, I talk much more about mothering of late, and so I'd like you just to sort of pretend for a minute that you're at some party and someone, various mothers basically have come up to you and they just give you a snapshot of their crappy life, you know, something that's happened to them or something that they have been going on about to the next person, and you're almost like, it's almost like one of those speed dating things where different people are telling you about their life and what they think, and this is in the context of mothering a child or a young adult with intellectual disability or learning disability, depending on, I use those terms interchangeably. So I've got 4 mothers, and just small quotes here from mothers that I've interviewed over the years. Kim. Because I wanted it to be right this time, and I suppose what it is, you have this fairy tale in your mind where you get married and you have a baby, and you push a pram round and you're going to have this beautiful baby, and it's gorgeous and lovely and cooing and all that. And it's just an illusion. It's just something the little girls have, and then the illusion was shattered. Kerry. When we went to this birthday party, a little girl got scratched on the eye, quite badly actually. He really did scratch her. The mother went absolutely berserk. I was trying to stand there, I was trying to reason with her and say, you know, I'm really sorry, and my son has this speech and language problem, and he can't hear you very well, and there's all these problems with these children around him. And she was saying all these things like, well, that's not my problem, that's yours. Then I discovered I was struggling at this point to try and fight back the tears, trying to be in control, bearing in mind there were about 30 people standing around me, all silent, and her screaming at me. Stella. I think it was so hard to be a parent of a child with special needs. You don't really know what to expect. You don't really know what to look for. And it's emotionally traumatic. You've got to think your child's different. I think that parents, if their child's in mainstream, a mainstream school, their child's less different. And I'm going to finish, but I'm going to come back to this poem. This is a poem that one of the mothers wrote before I came along, but she allowed me to take it on as someone who I'd interviewed over three periods over an 18-month time, and we had sort of quite a lot of in-depth interviews. And this poem was based on her experiences of the playground, where as a mother she experienced both exclusion and abuse from other parents who didn't have a child with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So her son was causing other parents, if you like, and their children problems, and this was her way, if you like, a motive way of dealing with it. And it actually tells us a lot more than some of the interview narrative that I could ever get from it. So it's called The Playground. I stand alone in the playground, no one talks to me. I see the looks and hear the whispers, she's the mother of the little beast. The boy who can't sit still in the classroom, the one that falls around. The child who torments the others and throws himself to the ground. She must be a useless parent, no control or restraint. We'll go and see the headmistress and make a formal complaint. We want the loony expelled, you know the one we mean. The boy who runs around the playground as if driven by a machine. Who sends other children flying, cuts and bruises everywhere. Get rid of the little menace. How you do it, we don't care. The brat who's been banned at lunchtime, the child who has no friends, the boy who's never invited to parties and Christmas cards, not one was sent. The child who cries because he is lonely and no friends invite him to tea. The boy who believes he is useless and not fit to be loved by me. The lad who is a loner through no choice of his own, who struggles in the classroom and is made to sit alone. The boy who lags behind, as hard as he may try, who at the age of 7 can barely read or write. And so I continue to stand alone. No one talks to me. The mother of the little boy who's been diagnosed with ADHD. And I come back to that one if I get to that point in a bit. But basically, just in case I don't get back to it, the story is that the other mothers did set up a petition to get rid of the lad, primary school lad, and obviously she went through some difficult times and pulled her son out of the school eventually. But I guess what I'm trying to get at here, theoretically, and draw upon, is that notion that the inhumanity, if you like, of how we deal with other people. So, for example, in the earlier work from the PhD, it made sense, having done some of the studies within criminology, it made sense for me to theoretically draw upon exclusion narratives. And so I was drawing on the likes of Jock Young, Stanley Cohen, in thinking about the exclusive society. So where Jock Young, he talks about things like deviancy and criminality. And I was talking about difficult differences rather than deviant difficulties. So he's talking about hierarchies, the underclass, and how we treat an other, if you like, these difficulties. And I was talking about hierarchies of impairment and how we understand or don't understand and exclude difficult differences. And so in Jock Young's later work, Vertigo of Modernity and things like that, he goes on to the boundaries become a lot more blurred and less binary, if you like, but he goes on to talk about othering in a lot more detail. And just like Stanley Cohen, the late Stanley Cohen, who's just died, and I really like his work, so it's such a tragedy, if you like, but he was old. But anyway, his book, States of Denial, talks about from psychological aspects of denial, but also societal denials. So how mass atrocities, for example, we see on rolling reporting, but we manage to look away. So we look away. We try not to see the difficulties around us, whether it's in another country or whether it's just down the street. We still manage to look away. So there's some of the, and again I come back to this, but there's some of the, if you like, theoretical influences. And more recently, I've come to draw upon feminist ethics of care because I'm moving into sort of in my latest work and the book that I'm writing at the moment is much more about being human, so it draws upon philosophical, moral aspects as well as sociological and social theory around being human, ethics and social justice. So what I'm trying to do in this paper, as we can see, begin to sort of like understand or just get a window into some of these people's lives, these women's lives, is I'm drawing on this ethics of care. Also I'm drawing on love labouring and Lynch's work around effective equality and how she moves this forward. And I'm attempting to understand care work and emotional work for mothers who have an intellectually disabled child or children. And then in this sense I understand, or I try to understand and consider care in relation to who cares. So Noddings, for example, implies that natural caring is something that is maternal, but ethical care is outside of this relationship. And I'm saying that ethical care is a much more nuanced than anything we can understand with regards to natural caring. So that's what it is. This is the sociological story, and the broad context to that is in thinking about what, as a mother, from my own perspective, I have a child who's intellectually disabled and 26, and from my perspective and other academic mothers as well, it's part of my job, if you like, to engage with this narrative, because there are many disabled activists, physically disabled activists, who've got involved in the academy and sometimes nod towards intellectual disability, but those who are intellectually disabled, those who are cognitively unable to engage in this, are not represented academically, and so there are more mothers, if you like, engaging with this. And this is from Kitty, who says, "My daughter Sesha will never walk the halls of the academy, but when what happens within these halls has the potential to affect her, then I as an academic have an obligation to socialise the academy to accept my daughter. Such care may seem to be far from the daily care her fully dependent body requires, and it may appear to be far-fetched to call this care, but it is part and parcel of that labour of love that we do as parents, especially parents of disabled children. More still in the case of those who are so disabled they cannot speak for themselves, a defining condition for those who are severely intellectually disabled." And so that's from Kitty's, if you like, academic, moral, philosophical perspective. And we've had a few narratives from some of the other mothers. I just wanted to give you something from my own personal research notes. As an experiential, if you like, aspect of my work and how I experienced understanding disability from both an academic and also from a mothering perspective. This is when I went to a conference that was called Inclusive Education Celebrating Diversity. I wait for the conference to begin. The opening ceremony begins and the room is filled with music, young people on the stage performing their interpretation of inclusive education. They weave in and out, their bodies supple and mobile, their voices clear, their story profound. They sing and chant, "Seize the day," at the end of punctuated exclamations of individuality, sharing, creativity, success. A lump in my throat and a tear attempts to escape. I pretend I have something in my eye and look around to see if I'm the only one emotionally provoked. Either I was, or like me, everyone else was able to disguise his or her emotionality. This, after all, is a serious event. I recall my daughter being on stage, desperately trying to remember a line and me willing her to. Whatever, she was great. Back in the audience, I'm sad and angry. I know that the philosophical underpinning of inclusive education is in some way right. Or is it, I ponder. Anyway, is it not a little premature to celebrate it when we haven't got there? I go back to my room and cry for myself and for my daughter, who will always be different and indeed difficult. So, critically then, in thinking about mothering and care, it's important to recognise that expectations, as we already saw in that first narrative, particularly in Western cultures, during pregnancy and beyond, can be filled with hopes and dreams for a child's future. Mothers often see their children as moving towards independence, autonomy or separateness, and often believe them to be extensions of themselves. However, a disabled child's position is often in conflict with these maternal expectations and emotions. For example, a child with autistic spectrum disorder who is unable to communicate and cannot necessarily be an extension of the mother's self, without invoking angst about what that self is. Or a child with Down syndrome may be unable to negotiate full independence, autonomy or separateness, and therefore challenge a mother's notion of successfully mothering a fully independent young adult. It has therefore been found that mothers are often left wondering about their own future and how their caring persona, in brackets, potentially spills out into their old age. And as their child becomes a dependent or interdependent adult, this indeed feeds into the notion that disability is a burden to both the individual and society, straddling emotional, practical and socio-political spheres. And this has an impact on policy and practice as well as day-to-day life. So to this end, therefore, I suggest we need to strip back what's considered as caring relations and emotional work, and understand the value of care and emotional support within relationships. Moreover, we need to provide a platform for understanding dependence and interdependence, and recognise that interdependence will ultimately lead to a great many enabling and socially just practices. Critically, feminist ethics of care literature problematises care in relation to, for example, the capacity to care, caring relations, gendered practice, labour, autonomy and dependence. Some disability in different ways is very critical of interpretations of care and caring practices. And it's these very aspects that I'm trying to thrash out in my current research, if you like. So, I forgive my terms, because obviously if you're all literature people or writing scripts or novels, then my use of the term plot might be ill-used, I don't know. But anyway, I thought these were the plots, if you like, in the story. So you've got the practical care sphere, which is where the day-to-day care work is carried out. The emotional care sphere, where love and care are psychosocially questioned, and then the socio-political care sphere, where social intolerance and aversion to difficult differences are played out. And in a way, all of these three speak to each other and have a relationship with each other. So whilst I do separate them, I'm not pretending that they don't have a relationship with each other as well. So I'm just going to go through the different examples. Obviously we've got the main players, who are the mothers. This is the practical caring sphere. Babs, as a mother with a son diagnosed with specific learning difficulties, explained that her experience of professional involvement as overwhelming. The next minute he was being taken over by all these things that we had to go to do, lengthy interviews. I hated every day I went to that place, play therapy in a specialist playgroup. I hated every time I took him. I felt deeply humiliated somehow. So what I'm doing here is I'm giving you 3 examples of the practical caring sphere. So this is one area where mothers just become overwhelmed with what they have to do, and that includes going to different places, and it could be the orthodontist for tongue thrust work. It could be that you end up doing speech and language therapy every evening, or physiotherapy every evening. As a mother, you do these practical everyday tasks depending on the type of disability involved. Then there's also this practical caring area where we understand that we have to engage with professionals, and so this is an important actually aspect of where we might find maternal absence, and this was literal as well as very symbolic in terms of how we understand it politically. This was a meeting. It was a parent partnership meeting. This was the interview transcript of one of them. I'm talking to Marlene about this meeting, I say, so in this report from last month, it's got here the professionals attending the meeting were the ed psych, teacher, speech therapist, child psychiatrist, doctors and student, the head teacher, Senko, class teacher, health visitor. All of those people. Were you at this meeting? And she said, yeah, I was there as well. I don't know why I don't get a mention, laughs, because I was holding the report, you see, from the meeting. Someone's name, unable to attend. Who's that? Marlene says, well, she's the parenting partnership officer. Well, I mean, obviously her absence from the actual report that was written, that is a part of her, if you like, file of her child, she was absent from that. But she also felt absent, and even then when she was there, the parenting partnership officer, who is also supposed to be the one person that is kind of like supporting her, was also actually literally missing. So that was kind of like, you know, quite difficult when we're thinking about exclusion in that sense. So just to give you sort of a flavour of what I'm talking about here when it comes to practical care work, as I've research suggests that a disabled child disables the whole family. This is largely based on negative social perceptions and sometimes of intolerance to disability, which also includes difficult differences. A social model of disability whereby barriers to inclusion are considered socially constructed was a breakthrough in experiences for disabled people, particularly those with a physical impairment. This model translates into family research by suggesting that a disabled child disables the family based on social constructions of difference and disability leaking into and impacting upon family practices. The social model of disability was a reaction to many aspects of disablism, but also in response to the medical model which pathologised disabled individuals. These socially constructed barriers do have an impact on care work, caring practices and maternal care, as this social intolerance leaks into daily life for mothers with disabled children and therefore limits general and solidarity care work. I have some problems with the social model of disability. Less problems than I do with the medical model, but I can't go into details in terms of what the problems are. It's just that the social model doesn't actually deal with some of these everyday, you know, if you're banging your head every day like this, or you're digging your feces out of your bum, which is what some of the parents talk about, you know, these are not going to be solved by bringing in and adhering to a social model of disability. Of course, I wouldn't suggest that we go back to a medical model. I just think it's much more complicated than that. And then the other final one of the practical caring was where you actually, as a mother of a disabled child, sometimes become the nurse. And this is just an example from Tracy, where she said her son, her baby, would stop breathing as part of his disability. And so she said, when he was taking his milk. She said, when I had friends round, we were watching telly and giving the baby the bottle. We got wrapped up in conversation and I looked down and he was blue. He hadn't taken a breath. She was told by the nurses what to do and pragmatically said that what you do is you pull the bottle out and then we'd have to flick his toes, and if that didn't work, pinch his toes, and if that didn't work, swing him round by his feet. Which sounds really weird, but it was like second nature. I'd put my coffee down and off we'd go. Friends were quaking in their boots, but it was just second nature because I'd done it so often. Now she's talking about something in a, you know, quite comically actually, you know, this idea of her swinging her baby around by his feet in order to get him to breathe. But, you know, that often you also see that sort of comedic thing going on with mothers who are talking about some of these aspects of their care work. That's all right. No, that's fine. That's fine. So how long have I got? A couple of minutes or 5 minutes? Okay. So that's the practical care work stuff. I'm going to quickly go over the emotional stuff. Okay, the emotional caring sphere, where mothering is lifelong, if you like, riddled with questions about love and care work. So for example, examples from the data here said a few years ago, I thought that's it, you can keep him, I don't want him, I just want some peace in my life. And Tina said that we were in tears, we both realised that she wasn't going to grow up, get married, have children and get a job in the way we always imagined. And then Tracy said there were times when I'd sit there and I'd be like gritting my teeth. I hated him. I loved him and hated him, but I really detested him, the child he was and what he did. I was in tears all the time. And what this really difficult stuff around the emotional sphere is that it's in conflict with what we are expected and what we expect to feel from ourselves in that sort of maternal narrative, if you like. And I think that when we come to think about ideas about love and love-hate and how we sometimes really dislike the person that we're supposed to love, it can really cause some difficult problems. And in some of my work I talk about suicidal thoughts, and that was already mentioned before, and it is unfortunately a narrative that is apparent. I'm not going to be able to cover this stuff, but part of the other aspect around the emotional side is that when your child behaves morally and outside of the way that you would expect to conduct yourself. So for example, where a child is lighting a porta cabin and could potentially kill people in that place, is behaving in a sexually inappropriate way because they don't really understand, because their developmental age is a lot younger than what they are. So if they touch a young girl of 8 and they're a teenager, that can then obviously be problematic. And so for the mother, her own sort of her questioning around her own morals are brought to the fore here. And then I don't need to go over that again, but that's the where we come to the point where we've got that emotional caring around how other people are projecting, if you like, and don't want to see you. You know, they want to exclude you from their lives so that they don't have to engage in that difficult narrative. And that's one of the things that I'm really trying to sort of get to the bottom with now. And so basically what I'm saying here to finish is this socio-political caring sphere is the one that encompasses it all, if you like. And so I'm saying that we don't care politically because we don't know how to. The political discourse, the policy discourse is rhetoric around partnership, around inclusion and around care and around parenting, and these things need to be sort of like driven and understood, I think, now at a more abstract level in order to come back, and at a moral level in order to come back to the practical. I've kind of like gone from the practical to the philosophical, and I'm going to go back. And then professionally we don't know how to care, because the social services system at the moment is finding it problematic. You've got these narratives in there. And then in terms of finally thinking about how we look at exclusion, a lot of the children and young people in schools, even though we're told that they're on the school register, for example in mainstream school, they're excluded emotionally, because they find it difficult to have friendship networks. They're intellectually excluded because they can't engage with the academic, and they're excluded practically because they're often removed from class. I'm really sorry that I'm completely like, you know, got too much stuff here. And yeah, but in a way that's why I started with the bit about othering, because that to an extent is, I'm coming back to it, is that we have this collective indifference that Roger Slee talks about, and that idea around how we are unable to, if you like, embrace these difficult differences. We can celebrate, in inverted commas, the quiet, disabled person who's not going to interrupt our everyday life too much, but the ones that cause us difficulty, maybe with some additional behavioural difficulties and things like that, we really struggle with that. And so everybody is then impacted, especially when we're in a system where inclusion is run through politically. So because we're in supposedly an inclusive education system and society, therefore that's what we're supposed to believe is happening, and that isn't. That's it at the moment.